You know that feeling when you start reading a fantasy novel and suddenly you're not just reading anymore, you're there? The magic feels real, the world breezes, and you can't put the book down? I've spent more than 20 years studying why some fantasy books create that experience, while others, even with amazing ideas, just don't connect with readers. And here's what fascinated me. It often comes down to tiny sentence choices many writers don't even realize they are making. So in this video, I'm sharing 11 game-changing techniques that will instantly transform your writing. And for the first one, think about your favorite scene in fantasy. What made it unforgettable? Chances are it put you right in the middle of the action, instead of making you watch from a distance. Let me show you what I mean. The dragon was breathing fire toward the village walls, versus the dragon's flames devoured the village walls. The first version feels like watching a documentary about a dragon attack. The second, you can practically feel the heat on your face. That's the power of active voice. When I revised my own scenes using this technique, I finally started to feel the tension and stakes everywhere. I found this especially crucial in scenes involving magic. Compare these two, for example. The spell was taking effect across the room, versus the spell froze every shadow in the room. See how the second version gives the magic agency? It's not just happening, it's doing something specific and vivid. Here's my step-by-step process for activating your prose. First, highlight every was and were in your scenes. Then ask who or what is actually doing the action. Next, put that actor at the start of the sentence. And finally, choose verbs that carry the action directly. Here's an example revising a scene where a mage confronts shadow creatures. The original version reads, "Dark shapes were moving along the walls." Now watch when I change it to "Dark shapes slithered along the walls." The activeness of the situation makes it more immediate, more vivid. But making your sentences active is just the start. Next, I'll show you how to eliminate an invisible wall that might be keeping readers from experiencing your world fully. Because you know what's fascinating? Sometimes the words we think make scenes more immediate actually push readers away. I call these filter words. Phrases like "she noticed," "he felt," "they saw." They're like putting a camera between your reader and the action. When I first learned about filter words, I went through my manuscript and found countless instances. Each one was like a tiny speed bump that would remind readers they were experiencing everything through a character instead of directly. Compare these two sentences. "She saw lightning crack across the sky," versus "lightning cracked across the sky." In the first version, you're watching someone watch lightning. In the second, you're right there in the storm. Here's the action plan I'd consider for this. First, search your manuscript for words like noticed, felt, saw, heard, seemed, appeared. Then ask yourself, can I show this directly? From here, cut the filter and let readers experience the moment themselves. This can be really powerful in moments of magical discovery. Instead of "he noticed the runes beginning to glow," I would write "the runes blazed to life beneath his fingers." Let your readers make the discovery alongside your character. But now that we've removed these barriers, let me show you how to control the emotional impact of every scene through another subtle but powerful technique. Your sentences are actually a secret weapon for controlling how readers feel. Consider your favorite piece of music. It probably has moments of quick, intense rhythm and periods of flowing melody. Your prose can create the same effect through sentence length. Short sentences are like quick beats. They create tension, urgency, excitement. Long sentences flow like melody. They give readers time to breathe, to feel, to process. Watch this transformation here. The spell failed, her hands shook, power drained away. Versus the spell unraveled slowly, its threads of power dissolving into the air. Her hands trembled with each pulse of fading magic, a reminder of this cost she'd already paid. Do you see how the first version creates sharp, urgent tension, while the second allows wonder to build gradually? Here's how to apply this deliberately. Use short sentences for action, tension, sharp emotions, and use longer sentences for description, reflection, and wonder. Mix them consciously to control your pacing throughout. But mastering pacing is only half the battle. To truly captivate readers, your characters need to feel alive, not like puppets on a string. You see, something I discovered while editing my first novel is a subtle mistake that makes characters feel disconnected from their own actions. I call it runaway body parts syndrome. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Examples for this are, her hand reached for the spell book, instead of she reached for the spell book. It's a small change, but the first version makes it sound like body parts are acting independently. Over the course of a story, this creates a subtle distance that weakens the reader's connection to your characters. Here's my suggestion to avoid this. Watch for body parts acting alone, then reconnect actions to characters. From here, consider the exception and use disconnected body parts intentionally for moments of dissociation or loss of control. But speaking of control, let me help you fix another pattern right away that could weaken your action scenes in this very moment. Here are two versions of the same sentence. First, the sorcerer was casting lightning bolts. Second one, the sorcerer cast lightning bolts. The pattern of using was or were with ing verbs creates a subtle but persistent distance between readers and action. Think of it like watching a replay instead of experiencing the live event. Here's my battle plan to fix it. First, search for was were plus ing constructions. Then replace with simple past tense. And finally, add specific details to strengthen the image. For example, before, the apprentice was studying the ancient tome. After, the apprentice studied the ancient tome. Candlelight dancing across pages that smelled of forgotten centuries. But even the strongest actions fall flat without the right words to bring them to life. During my first attempt at writing epic fantasy, I sprinkled made-up magical terms into every paragraph. The result? Even I felt lost in a fog of unfamiliar worlds instead of immersed in the story. But here's the secret I discovered over time. The magic of fantasy writing isn't in how many unique terms you create, it's in how strategically you use them. I learned to use universal words for emotions and basic actions, choose setting appropriate words for descriptions, and save magical terms for truly magical moments. For instance, in a scene where a mage performs a ritual, I might write, "She breathes deeply, centering herself before beginning the Shadowman spell." Notice how familiar words carry us to the magical term, making it feel natural and significant? But even perfect word choice isn't enough without something deeper driving it. Here's why some magical moments fall flat while others leave readers breathless. Emotional anchoring. Consider a healing scene that reads like this. She cast the healing spell. Technically accurate, but about as exciting as watching paint dry. Now the revised version. She poured healing magic into the wound, each pulse of power carrying a silent prayer for her brother's survival. The action remains the same, but now it's connected to something that matters emotionally. To keep this in mind, here's an emotional anchoring checklist. First, identify the emotional core of each action. Then, show how the character's feelings affect the actions. And finally, connect magical actions to personal stakes. This technique transformed how I write magical systems. Instead of focusing solely on rules and limitations, I now consider the emotional weight of each magical action. How does it feel to use this power? What personal cost or meaning does it carry? But even with an emotional anchor, we still need to ensure those moments flow seamlessly together. Think of your sentences like links in a chain. Each one should connect to the next, creating forward momentum. Here's what I mean. Before, the spell exploded. The room was damaged. She felt afraid. After, the spell exploded, shattering ancient mirrors and sending shadow shards skittering across the floor. She backed away from the darkness spreading from each broken piece, her reflection fragmenting into 1,000 watching eyes. See how each detail leads naturally to the next? This technique transformed my writing from a series of events into an immersive experience. Here are 3 steps for proper sentence threading. First, end sentences with elements that lead to the next thought. Second, vary your transition techniques. And third, create cause and effect chains. But a flowing scene needs more than just action. It needs to come alive for all the senses. It doesn't matter how unique your magic system is or how detailed your world's history. If readers can't feel like they're there, none of it really matters. Take the first time Harry Potter enters Diagon Alley, or when Frodo steps into Lothlorien. These scenes work because they engage all our senses in a structured, purposeful way. That's when I developed what I call the sensory scaffold technique. Let me show you the difference it makes. Before, the wizard's sanctum was filled with magical items. Everything was old and mysterious. After, the silence hit her first. Not empty silence, but the thick, waiting quiet of a library at midnight. Crystal chimes tinkled as her cloak brushed against shelves of ancient artifacts, each note hanging in the air a moment too long. Notice how several senses are engaged at once here? There are 4 steps to building your own sensory scaffold. First, choose your anchor sense. This is your foundation, the dominant sensation that defines your location. In a marketplace, it might be the cacophony of voices. In a dragon's lair, perhaps the sulfurous heat. Don't just pick the obvious visual description. I always ask myself, what sensation would hit someone first if they were suddenly transported here? Step 2 then is to layer in contrast. This is where the magic happens. Add a conflicting sensation that creates tension. In my library scene, those sudden crystal chimes become twice as striking against that heavy silence. Step 3 is to connect to emotion. This is what turns description into experience. Link a sensory detail to your character's feelings or memories. Every sense can carry emotional resonance if you let it. And lastly, add dynamic elements. This brings your scene to life. Include movement that draws the eye, or mind's eye in this case. When I'm stuck on this step, I close my eyes and imagine being in the location. What small movements would catch my attention? But remember, you're not just collecting random sensory details. You're building an experience, layer by layer, that pulls readers into your world and makes them feel like they are really there. Moving on, let me now show you how to balance these vivid details with something that might surprise you. Because here's a counterintuitive truth that I learned the hard way. The more magical elements you include, the less magical they feel. It's like trying to hear a single voice in a room where everyone's shouting. This principle transformed how I write magical scenes for certain more grounded stories. Instead of an original version like this, ethereal energy swirled through the ancient chamber as mystical forces converged. I'd consider writing something like this. This spell turned her tiny apartment into a nexus of cosmic power. Her cat, unimpressed by it, knocked a crystal off the coffee table. Let me show you 3 ways how I approach this balance. First, ground magical elements in everyday details. Then, use mundane comparisons for magical effects. Instead of describing magic with more magic, try the teleportation spell felt like missing the last step on a staircase. That same lurching sensation, but stretched across infinity. And lastly, show how magic affects normal life. Here's a more comedic example of this technique in action. Instead of the necromancer channeled dark energies summoning forth ancient powers, try the necromancer's dark ritual required 3 cursed candles, 2 soul gems, and a trip to the corner store because she was out of milk for the ceremonial tea. This contrast makes magical moments actually feel magical. When a character casts a world-shaking spell but still has to worry about paying rent or feeding their cat, both the mundane and magical elements feel more rare. But as said, this particular technique only really comes alive in certain stories. Having said that, everything we've discussed only comes together in what I call rhythmic prose, writing that feels almost musical in its flow. This isn't about poetry or fancy language, it's about understanding the natural rhythms of different types of scenes. Let me show you the 3 types of rhythm I use. First, we have the action rhythm, short, punchy. This is perfect for fights, chases, and moments of high tension. For those, use short sentences that hit like drum beats. The ward broke, shadows poured in, she ran, each step left frozen footprints. Behind her, darkness hungered. Then we have the descriptive rhythm, flowing, detailed, for world building and magical atmosphere. For this, let your sentences flow like melody. Moonlight spilled through stained glass windows, painting the ancient stones in shards of ruby and sapphire, while whispers of old magic danced between the dusty shelves like forgotten memories seeking recognition. And last but not least, the emotional rhythm. And this one varies with feeling. Match your sentence rhythm to your character's emotional state. Notice how this here builds. She couldn't. She had to. The spell burned in her palm, demanding release, while everything she'd ever believed about magic screamed at her to stop, to think, to remember her training. But her brother's life hung by a thread, and sometimes love demands we break all the rules we thought we'd never break. You see the ups and downs and how her emotional state affects the rhythm of the entire sentence? This to me is pure magic on paper. And if this video helped you rethink how you write sentences, imagine what transforming your entire writing process could do for your novel. In this video here, I'll show you the exact framework that saved me months of rewriting and helped me finally finish my fantasy novels.